OnceHuman is out now, and I've played a lot already and got a ton of tips that I wish I knew before starting, so let's get into those. But first, real quick, you can download the game via the special link in the video description to get a ton of free rewards for a limited time, and also thank you to Starry Studios for sponsoring this video. One of the most interesting features of OnceHuman is capturing deviations, which are objects or creatures mutated by the mysterious substance Stardust. You'll get your first deviation, a red butterfly, very early on, and while not every type of deviation has this ability, the butterfly can actually help you out in combat. It's surprisingly strong, being able to either attack a designated target or at will, and it will keep doing so independently of you for 35 seconds. So very nice is that you can sit behind cover while this creature is still able to deal damage to a boss, for example, or combine your attack power to melt an enemy's health. This ability is on a pretty lengthy cooldown, over 1.5 minutes, but you can shorten it by recalling the deviation early. But yeah, overall best to save this powerful ability for more dangerous enemies, and of course the more deviations you collect, the more options you get. I've already found a jelly that can turn into deployable cover for me after continuing with the main story, and there are many more to discover throughout the rest of the quest and by simply exploring the huge map. But you of course also need to look after yourself, and one thing that's really helpful for that is making sure your hunger and thirst meters are always topped off. Obviously there's negative consequences if these go too low, but there are also positive effects if you take good care of yourself. As long as your hunger is above 60%, so basically as long as the first and second segment of the meter are full, you get more max HP and a boost to melee damage. If you make sure your thirst level is also above 60%, you also have a higher sprint speed and lose less stamina from sprinting, so these are definitely buffs you want to have active all of the time. And this is why I recommend you keep them topped up, because there's an additional benefit to completely filling the meter. If you do so, your hunger or thirst will not go down for the next 20 minutes. So it's much more efficient to keep yourself topped up, as every time you eat or drink until you're full, you're granted 20 minutes where you don't have to worry about the meters and don't have to consume any food or drinks. Now with this being a survival game, you of course have to hunt and scavenge for food and drinks, but luckily they're pretty easy to come by. You can gather dirty water by standing in a shallow lake or pool and then cook it to turn it into drinking water at a stove, which you need to build in your base. It's also used to cook foods, including meat from deer that spawn very frequently in the starting region. Hunting these down is pretty easy with a crossbow, likely the first ranged weapon you'll craft, and a neat thing about that weapon is that you can recover the ammunition after you shoot it, provided you hit your target. Since ammo needs to be looted or crafted, it's a pretty limited resource, but much less so for your crossbow if you make sure you pick your arrows back up after firing. Even against enemies in the first region, the crossbow will deal significant damage, one-shot killing basic enemies if you hit them in the head. So as long as you make your shots count, that makes it a pretty great starting option until you've crafted yourself some ammo reserves. And by the way, if these tips have been helpful so far, then it would be awesome if you could leave us a like. Another way you can save ammo is by using your melee weapon, and you really shouldn't underestimate these. Most early region enemies will die in 2 to 3 swings, and they don't attack frequently enough to be a big threat to you. Plus, you can of course increase your own damage by making sure you eat well, like I just mentioned. So unless you get overwhelmed by a group, your melee weapon will often suffice to take down enemies, which in turn helps you save ammo. You can even sneak up on enemies to perform a stealth takedown to take them out instantly. So that's another trick that will help you save up ammo for more dangerous enemies like elites or the raid boss like great ones. And on the note of ammo, while you can find some from gear or supply chest, it's best to make sure that you can craft your own steady supply of ammunition. We'll need a couple of materials for this, and while some like copper and wood are very common, there are some that are a bit harder to come by. One is acid, which is not something you can gather from a node, but it needs to be looted from enemies instead. The other material for ammo crafting, sulfur, is a bit harder to find. Like copper, it's mined from ore veins, but these ones seem to pop up less frequently. So keep an eye out for these rock formations and mine them when you see them to make sure you can make your own steady supply of ammunition. One alternative you have is going to the monolith in the first region, which is the giant tower where you eventually go to fight the region boss. Enemies here drop a lot of the materials needed to craft ammo, but since there are a lot more of them and some more dangerous types as well, you at the very least want a decent ranged weapon of your own before going into this place. And while you can find firearms from chests, you'll want the ability to craft these too, especially since you can also find powerful blueprints to craft even better gear. In order to do so, you need a gear workbench in your base, base, as well as some other structures like a furnace to melt copper in. Your base is actually super important in OnceHuman, as you can come here to rest and heal back up, craft weapons, gear, supplies and food, and even store the mutated deviant creatures that you capture. Now, one very neat thing is that you can easily move your entire base to a new spot, albeit with a small cooldown on it, so if you find a better spot, you can quickly move all of your stuff there. So what is a good spot for a base then? Well, one with lots of crafting resources nearby. Crafting nodes respawn and on a relatively short cooldown too, so if your base is close to a bunch of trees and some copper ore, you can easily grab some key early materials right from your front door. And since you can always fast travel back to your base, you can go exploring after harvesting everything, teleport back when you're done with that, and you'll be able to mine your ores and cut your trees again. This becomes especially important when you start moving into new regions of the map, which happens after you defeat a region boss at the Monolith Tower. Higher tier resources like tin can be found in these new regions, which are required to craft better weapons, gear and tools. So as soon as you find a spot with a ton of these new materials, move your base over there and start farming these higher tier crafting resources. Obviously, going into these higher level regions is more dangerous as well, but you can make some preparations to make sure you don't lose anything when you die. If you go down, you'll lose some of the resources you currently have on you, but these can be recovered by returning to your place of death. And to save you a long walk back from your base camp, you can construct a campsite right outside of a rift anchor location, which are the dangerous areas in the open world with a ton more enemies, but also way more loot. Having a camp outside one of these means that if you die, you can immediately respawn at said campsite and run back in to get your stuff. They cost very few resources to build, and you can also do some basic crafting and cooking there, so there's really no downside to placing one. The only thing to keep in mind is that placing a campsite removes your previous one, but other than that, you can place as many of these respawn points as you like. And it is really worth your time to explore these spaces for all the loot they hold. Most locations have a variety of objectives that usually boil down to killing a number of enemies, activating the rift anchor, which is also required for the main quest, and looting special chests. While it can take a while to hunt down every last objective, I would at the very least recommend you look for the glowing mystical chest that every location has. These always contain a blueprint for either a new weapon or a new piece of armor, and I found that they often appear in the bigger central buildings of a rift anchor location. You can then use these blueprints to craft new gear, or if you find a duplicate, use it to improve the level of an already owned blueprint to make the stat boosts on that item even better. Other than that, you want to pick up as many miscellaneous items as you can find as well, as these can be disassembled into a ton of useful crafting materials. And speaking of useful components, while enemies often drop loot, sometimes they can also drop a part of themselves, which you can then pick up and use as a weapon. Those spotlight guys can drop their headlamp, allowing you to use it against enemies, and the same is true for these briefcase enemies that also drop their head as a weapon. During the first boss fight against the Ravenous Hunter, you can even shoot off its arm and grab yourself a minigun to use against the creature. And there are many more enemies with unique interactions, like these lamp bugs that you can stab on instantly to kill them. Just make sure you run away from the explosion that follows though. There are also larger monsters that can be brought down if you destroy the weak spot on their legs. So the bottom line is, make sure you know what enemies you are fighting and if there are tricks or weaknesses that you can exploit. Again, download the game via the special link in the video description to also get a ton of free items, and doing so really supports the channel as well. Leaving a like would help us out, and subscribe for more. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.